I'm Kendra Burton. In this tape, we'll be doing one complete oil painting step by step from start to finish. Remember, one of the best ways to learn by video is to watch the tape entirely through first, taking notes as needed, and then go through a second time as you do your painting, stopping to review as often as you like. Also, if you adjust the color on your TV set to create natural flesh tones, you should be able to get an accurate color reproduction to help in mixing your paint colors. Let's look at the painting we're doing today. Here we have a country field and barn. The mood is created by the sunny foreground set against the dark sky, which reminds us of the first light breaking through the clouds after a fresh spring rain. You can almost smell the scent of the rain-washed grass and daisies. As you look to the sky, you can nearly hear the call of the seagulls overhead. And any moment, you may expect a rainbow to appear. And finally, the barn is reminiscent of somewhere you may have been and longed for, in a quiet calm of a country setting. Now, the first thing we need to do before we begin your painting is to make sure you have the supplies you need. And once you have the necessary supplies, you can now prepare your canvas layout. I've pre-sketched the layout here with a light wash of thinner with a touch of ultramarine blue. You may simply use a pencil to sketch it on at home if you'd like. One of the main parts of sketching on the layout is to determine where the horizon line comes. In this particular painting, it comes just about halfway up the canvas. Once you have that, you can easily sketch in the background mountains, the distant trees, and the barn, as well as the fence posts. This may be a good time to stop and pause your tape as you do your canvas layout. Then, after you've completed your canvas layout, you can now prepare your palette colors. First of all, we'll start with titanium white. And you want to use a whole bunch of this because this color you use in quite a few mixes. So this is titanium white. I have taken a little bit of linseed oil to thin this down, make it just a little bit more creamy. Then the next color that we use is called cadmium yellow light. Now there are different tones of this color. You want to make sure in this painting that you get the cadmium yellow light instead of medium or deep. Then we go on to yellow ochre and raw sienna and burnt sienna. Let me compare these two for you. Raw sienna is the one that's not quite as red. Burnt sienna, of course, is the redder of the two. In fact, sometimes I wonder why they don't, maybe it'd be nice if they call these two different colors, but that's to explain to you the difference between raw and burnt sienna. Then on to burnt umber, which is a very, very deep brown. It's almost black. The next color we have is cerulean. This is spelled C-E-R U-L-E-A-N, cerulean blue. And then the last color we have is Payne's gray. Now I'll spread this out just a little bit. It's almost like a blue gray. Payne's gray is the last one that we have on our palette. And I have pre-mixed a few of these colors. In the first color, this is the sky color as well as the distant mountains. And I'll tell you what to put into those at this time. Okay, you'll first of all want to start with white since it has mostly white. Then add a little bit of Payne's gray and just a touch of raw sienna. Make sure you don't get too much of this or else it'll make it more green than you should like. Okay, then the next color that I pre-mixed is called a blue-green, and this is almost a blue-green-gray in here. This one we use white, remember use the most of that, then Payne's gray, and just a touch of our cerulean blue and just a touch of our raw sienna. You want to make sure it's the raw sienna. Then I'm going to mix a few more of these before we begin painting. And what I'm going to do is go into this color that we called our blue-green color, and it's kind of a dusty blue-green. Pull it aside and make kind of a more medium green. These are going to be for our tree colors. And you really don't need a whole lot of these because you don't have that many trees in the background there. So there's kind of a medium green. We just pulled it aside, added a little bit of that cadmium yellow light. And now I'm going to take a little bit more of this and pull it aside and lighten it even some more for a real light highlight. You hardly need any of this color. More yellow. This is our cadmium yellow light, of course. And then just a touch of white if you need to. This one is for our highlights on those trees, and so you want to make it kind of light. In fact, see, that's still, even though that's a fairly light green, it needs to be a little bit whiter. So I'm going to grab some more titanium white. Real nice light green for our highlights on the trees. Maybe just a touch more white in this. And that's as many colors as I'm going to have you mix before we go back to our canvas. Okay, now you'll pick up the great big number 12. This is a bristle filbert, or excuse me, a bristle bright. The bright and the filbert differ because the bright is, of course, flat and square on the top, and the filbert is rounded. So this is our bristle bright. We're going to dip into the color that we call a blue-gray color. This is going to go into the sky. Choose where the darker areas of your clouds are. Now, I don't want to get over into this area too much. I want to make the sky really expand out, and so I'm going to do a little of the dark, and then as I lighten up, I'm going to be adding some more white to this. I know at this point it looks a little bit dark, but it will lighten up as you add some more white. This brush is really a good-sized brush, and so it covers a lot of our area. Now, you see, you can carry that dark into here a little bit because it makes a good contrast to have a real sunny barn against the deeper sky. Don't take it right to the mountain because you want to leave a little bit of space in here because these distant mountains actually are used with this very same color. Okay, kind of scrub that in. I'm going straight into the canvas, real kind of circular or dipping strokes in here. Now, I'm not going to clean my brush. I'm simply going to dip back into our white. Now, this is a pure white, which I've added a little linseed oil to. Now, if it is too stiff still, you may want to use some of your medium, which is a mixture of linseed oil and thinner. And maybe for the purposes of simplifying terms, I'll just simply try to call it oil as we're painting. So you want to dip into some of your oil if you need to thin this out. And you just kind of scrub these billowy, kind of overcast clouds in here. Okay, we're simply adding some of your white to lighten this up a little bit more over here. Like I say, sometimes I have people keep the darks toward the corner, but in this particular painting we want to create a real open, airy sky in here, so we're taking the lights up into the corners. Still kind of scrubbing straight into that canvas. And as you add your white to this mixture, then it's going to lighten up those grays, so it's not quite as dark. Now, this is kind of interesting here. We want to create a fairly dark area where it comes against the barn, but then as it gets closer to the mountains, we're going to lighten up with a little bit more white. We want a little bit more white to lighten up that sky some more. Let's work some up into here. See how that just makes those clouds start to billow? And as we've got the little bit lighter on our brush, we're going to just work that right down into those distant mountains. It almost makes it look as if it's kind of misty. It's maybe raining way back over in there. On over to the left. If you find that your sky is a little too dark, don't hesitate to dip into a little bit more white because it's just easy. Okay, let me adjust this just a little bit. Now the next thing we're going to do is to take our here's our soft sable flat up on our palette. This is number 12 sable flat. And we're going to dip into, like I mentioned before, the blue-gray, and we're going to do the very, very distant mountains. Now, I'm going to point out on our canvas here that these two on the far sides are the darker ones. the one on the right and the one on the left, whereas the one more toward the center is going to be with our blue-green color. So as you paint that, keep that in mind. So here is our blue-gray that we mixed. We're kind of working it in. I may have to add a little bit of white in there in just a minute, but I'm going to block in the top of this one first. And these shapes are fairly rounded. They don't have to be really jagged mountains. They're just more hills. Now I'm going to take some white, dipping again into the pure white to make it kind of misty at the base of these mountains or hills. See, that kind of creates a little bit more misty look to it. Same over here. They need to dip into a little bit more white. Like I say, if it's a little too stiff, if you want to touch a little of your oil into that, as you're painting, just dip your brush right into it. It'll help you get a little bit lighter color, and it'll make it easier. Okay, so there's a distant mountain right in there. Then we're going to do this next one that's more in the center of your painting, still using the same brush. But we're going to go into the color that we call our blue-green. And I say it should be a blue-green-gray kind of because it's really quite a muted color. Maybe on your canvas or on your camera it really doesn't look quite as blue-green. But it is actually kind of a blue-green. It is a little different than this other combination. Okay, and let's get this down. Yeah, sometimes on your television set, some of the colors aren't exactly as easy to differentiate. So if I feel like they may be a little trickier, I'll try to explain that so that it will help you in doing your finished painting. Okay, so we're just going to make this really kind of nice and light in here. Now, if you feel like that's a little too dark, you can still add a little bit of white right over it if you need to. That kind of creates a little bit more distance in there. Now, you want to create also a misty effect, so if you've lightened that up just slightly, then you need to give a little bit more white right down in here. Okay, I still have this really soft brush. And the next step we're going to go into is trade brushes with our Filbert number 4. I do use that quite a bit too in painting. To do our background trees. Now you'll take the Filbert number 4. This is the bristle brush that is flat and rounded on the top. And we're going to dip into, this is the kind of green, blue, gray color that we mixed up. Maybe a little bit of oil as we paint. We're just going to block in the base of these background trees. Oh, here is, grab that other brush again. There's a little bit of a tiny little mountain right back in here that we want to have in our blue-green color. So we'll just block that in real quickly. You don't have to take a lot of time with this. But you do want to do that before you go on to your trees. Okay, so there's another little distant mountain right in there. Then with our Filbert number 4, we're going to just do kind of the base of these trees. This is where it's going to be the most dark, the darkest color. And it really isn't really green. This color is not very bright as far as intensity. Okay, up against the top of the barn here. Kind of just edge in on the edge of the barn. Now I'm going to just simply take this brush and dip into a little white right at the base of these trees, and the reason I do that is so it will be lighter when we get to that little fence, because if it were too dark the fence wouldn't show up, so we want this to be a little bit lighter right in here. Kind of misty almost. Just high enough that it can create an area where your fence is going to come. Then back into that dark blue-green mixture. Little cluster of trees there, and then right here we have some more bushes, still with our blue-green, and over onto the right. See, it's mostly this dark color, and then you can go in with some highlights afterwards. And I'm going to just kind of edge in a little bit of a hill right in here. I'm kind of scrubbing because, see, actually we have the same color. I want to leave just a little bit of space, put some highlight in there. Let's do the same over here. There's a little bit of a hill that makes this drop off. It's almost as if the barn's sitting right on top of a little mound in here. So same color, I'm just kind of scrubbing in there. Now I'm going to dip into the medium color of green. And I'm using a little bit of oil with this. Like I say, if it feels like it's kind of stiff, you can do that. And then I'm going to top off these trees. Now I'm going to take this and do all the rest of the trees. I don't need to leave any spaces for the highlighting because that you can simply just add right on top of this color. So there's our medium green. Here we edge up right into here. Make the top of your trees kind of nice and uneven. You don't want little cotton balls. You want maybe a little tiny bump up and then a bigger cluster of leaves toward the top. That makes your painting more interesting. It makes your trees look more real. Okay, and then we'll move on to these other little bushes in here. Bumping up as you need to make them kind of interesting. Okay. Now the 1, 2 are right. Kind of fill that in with the shapes you'd like. Now we're going to just simply wipe out with our paper towel or brush and then go into the highlight color here and put these on the top of the trees. All I'm doing is just kind of dotting on. Now this is, and I need to explain this way too, as you apply this, if you're over quite wet paint, you may want to just touch it on instead of pulling, because if you pull too much, it's going to pick up a lot of the other color. You can pull this a little bit just to get a variety, but you want to make sure that you're not eliminating the lightness of that highlight. Also, if you're working like this, if you want to slant your brush downward, kind of lay it on, sometimes it'll stay there better, especially if you're working wet over wet paint. Well, there's some nice sunny highlights in those trees. Little bushes in here, a little bit more paint we need. And I'll just take a little bit of that, kind of separate these little pieces of land back in here. Okay, then the next thing we're going to do is use some pure colors to block in our barn. Now on this, the colors that you use to block it in are, first of all, burnt sienna for the roof, then yellow ochre for the sunny side of the barn, and then burnt umber for the shady side. So these are pure colors. You don't even have to mix these. You can just dip into these and block them on. Now I'm going to be using one that's a brush that I feel is fairly easy, and I'm going to just clean out this one that I just barely used, which is our Filbert Bristle number 4. But if you feel like you're in more control using the Sable flat, you're welcome to do that too. Okay, so we're going to go to the roof, pure color here. It may be kind of stiff, so we're using some of our oil to thin that out a little bit. And we're just blocking in the roof. Kind of a nice little old red roof here. See, this is the burnt sienna, and it actually is really quite red. Got a little bit of a seam right in there, so we're going to change the angle just slightly. Okay, then the next thing we'll do is, while I've got this brush, I'm just wipe it out, and I'm going to go into the darker color to block in this area. Now you'll notice I haven't even marked in there where my windows or doors or anything go, because of the next process. When I texture it, I don't need to do that, because then I'll come back with a brush and just put those in later. Okay, I'm back to a pure color. This is our burned umber, and this is going to be for the dark side of the barn, which is the shady side. Our sun, of course, is coming from the left, so the shady side is right in here. Just kind of scrubbing that in. A little bit more burned umber. I know this color is really, really dark. In fact, on the palette, it probably looked almost black, but it really is just a real dark, dark brown. It's a very dark, warm brown. And when your barn is finished, though, you'll notice that it's quite a bit lighter, but that has to do with the palette knife texture that we'll be putting on in a minute. See, maybe these people built this and then they need a little extra room, so they put a little side thing there. I guess that's a lean-to or whatever the term is you call that. Right over here at the side, it kind of comes down and then it comes out here. I guess my dad would probably know what that's called more. He, since he is an architect, he would be able to tell me. But you can call it whatever you want. In fact, I don't know, these people, maybe these people that built this barn, they may not have even had an architect, and so maybe they didn't know what it was either. Okay, now on the lighter side, we're going to do another pure color, and this is our yellow ochre. So we're just going to pick up that. Oh, now this brush, if you find that it's kind of dirty, you may want to swish it in a little bit of your thinner, because that lighter side does need to be a little bit lighter. Yellow ochre. Just going to block that in. And I'm going to kind of define a little shadow line on this lighter side by dipping back into the burnt umber. And it goes right underneath this little eave of the barn. Now, as you're painting, you may find that your lines get crooked. I like to have it kind of look so that it looks like a fairly stable barn, but sometimes people like to make them a little bit crooked so that it gives it a little character, and it really dates it. It makes it look a lot older. So if you find that you're getting a little crooked, if that's what you want, it's okay. If you like to have a little straighter, then double check as you're painting. Okay, so once that's blocked in, you've got your little shadow under the eave there. Then I'm going to show you a really neat technique to get some texture on your barn. I'm going to take the palette knife, and I'm going to start with the texture on the roof. Now, to do this, you can use several different colors. First of all, we're going to start with a little bit more burnt sienna. I'm just going to take some of this color. I know this is what we blocked in with, but I'm going to give it more texture. So if you come back to the canvas with me, I'm going to just kind of lay this on. Now I go kind of side to side on here. It's kind of the way the boards go. And that's our burnt sienna. I know it's a blocking color, but it also helps to give us a little bit more texture when we're using our other ones too. And I'm going to take a little bit of some raw sienna too. This is a little bit more gold instead of red. And I'm going to add a little bit of that up in here. Here I'm just kind of laying that on. It can have lots of texture. I know maybe some people like really, really smooth paintings, but boy, I love to see a lot of texture in paintings because that makes it look really real. Like a real oil painting instead of maybe like a print. Okay, now those are basically those two colors and then a white. Now I'm going to mix up an off-white just really quickly by pulling some of our white, this is titanium white, and then just a touch of touch of yellow ochre over here. This is an off-white color, and we're going to put this in for some more texture, and this kind of gives it a lot nicer highlight too. You'll see how this adds a lot of white on the roof. Okay, so there's an off-white color. And we'll just dip into a little bit of that. Now, sometimes I have to keep cleaning my palette knife so that as I dip in, I don't have it spread all over the palette knife. So now I'm going to dip into a little bit more. This is just on the side edge of my palette knife, if you can see that. In fact, I'll put it against there so you can see it a little bit better. And now I'm going to just edge along the edge of this roof line. Just kind of lay that in there, and it's not really very much paint. And you may have to come a little closer to see this. I'm not sure if you can see it because my hand kind of has to come up a little bit. But I'm just going to lay in the edge like that. Then I'm coming up like so with this off-white mixture. And you also can do the other side of it as well. See, it's catching a little bit of light from here. And on down. Side. Okay, then the next thing you can do is to put a little bit of it on the lighter roof area, which is right in here. And you know, if you pick up some of the other colors and stir it around, it's okay just to make it kind of marbly looking almost. How it really picks out the texture. It gives it kind of a marbly effect. I think this is so pretty. A lot of times people like to come up and look a little bit closer and just get a little view of what we've done, and this makes it fun for them to look closely. This creates a real rustic effect by adding this texture to this. You know, you may want to have just a little bit lighter line here to kind of divide where it changes directions in the roof slope. Okay, now on the dark side, I'm going to tell you what we're going to use to texture this. You may want to add just a little bit more of your blocking color, which was the burnt umber, just for texture. This is our burnt umber, the one that was our blocking color, of course, and then we'll do some more highlightings in a minute. Okay, a little bit of texture is all we need to do with that. And then I'm going to go into the color that's our raw sienna. Now, maybe if you make the mistake of going into the burnt, which is the redder, it won't really hurt it too much, but I generally like to go into the raw sienna right now. Now, what I'm going to do too is kind of like leave a shadow under the ridge of this dark side. So when I'm putting the texture on, I'm leaving an edge, leaving a little bit of a space where there's kind of a shadow there as well. Now, I'm kind of dragging this over. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but I'm leaving a lot of texture, really rugged texture in there, because that's going to give it a real old weathered kind of look. So when I say drag it, it means you're actually leaving some of the underpainting color coming through. Okay, so this is our raw sienna, and then I'm going to do one more color to lighten it up, and when it's done, it should be quite a bit lighter. Right in here. Got a little fence post there. Sometimes you get little accidentals, but a lot of times they're okay, and sometimes they'll add interest. Now I'm going to go back to the palette and take some of this color that's called our blue-gray, and I'm going to use that as a highlight as well on that shady side of the barn. Now here you just kind of want to streak it in, kind of pick up some of the other colors. I'm really not pressing very hard. I'm just kind of getting the tips. I want to just, if I were pressing too hard, it would actually pull off the paint quite a bit. So I'm just kind of laying it on. Back into the blue-gray color. Real rugged old rustic barn here. Okay, now that's my dark side. Now I'll go into the lighter side, which is where it catches more of the sun, and I'm going to highlight that with, first of all, I'll do like I did before, just kind of go over it just a little bit for more texture. You don't need to have too much of this. In fact, I may have ended up getting just a little too much. Okay, then you'll put in a couple more colors in that one, which will be raw sienna, and you can even add a little burnt sienna. Actually, you can add both of the siennas in this one if you want, just for interest. This is raw sienna. It's not a whole lot different than the yellow ochre, but it is a little bit darker. So we'll streak a little bit of that in there. Kind of try to keep that shadow up under the barn eave. Okay, and then we talked about maybe just a little touch of this, just for interest. This is our burnt sienna. This is texture, and then you'll see we'll cut in some of the individual different woods. Okay, now I'll go back for the final highlight, which will be our off-white. And I don't want to get too much on there, because you just want to use just a little bit in here. See how that kind of gives it that nice textured feel. Now I'm going to cut in to create the seams of where the boards come together. And to do that, I'll take my palette knife, and I'm just going to get some of this pure burnt umber. Now, we'll just have to judge this as to whether it's going to stay on here or not. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you need to even dip this into a little bit of medium. Oh, it looks like it's doing well. Now, so what we'll do is take our palette knife up here. We've got a little bit of paint on here. This is our burn umber. We're cutting in the little seams between the boards. This makes it really interesting too. Load up if you need to. We may need to grab a little bit more. You can have fat boards or skinny boards. These people, I guess when they built this, they used whatever was around there. A lot of times they just had to. One thing you need to make sure of as you're doing this, I know when we have these curved kind of palette knives, a lot of times people will come in and they think they're straight, but they end up a little sideways. I'm just telling you that if you want a sideways barn, then that's okay. But if you do want it straight, you have to be really, really careful to get that lined up before you pull the stroke down. Okay, well, we're doing all of our little seams here. We're still burnt umber. Just cutting in, giving it kind of division there. Now I'm going to continue and do the same thing on the dark side. You may not see the divisions as much on the dark side. Here again, this is a burnt umber. But you want to go through the process anyway so that if you can see the divisions, then it really creates a nice look. Okay, so I'm just cutting this. In fact, I'm not even having to add very much of this umber in here at all because I've got so much below that I'm just basically kind of cutting in here. Okay, now I'm going to do the little windows that come in here and then the big barn door. You'll want to switch brushes. This next brush that I've got is, it's still a sable flat, but it's a lot smaller. This is a number 4. I'm going to go into the burnt umber. We're going to put in our windows and door. Okay, back up to the canvas. Now over here we have 3 of these. Now if this is reminiscent of something that you've seen or you know, and the windows aren't quite the same as these windows, you can change things a little bit if you'd like to. Now let me tell you one thing about painting wet over really, really wet is that you may have to add quite a bit of oil to thin it down because the thinner paint will stick to the thicker paint. If you can remember that principle, that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind, and it will help you on your paintings. So see where that isn't quite as dark? I just put a little bit more oil with my color, and now I'm just going to lay it on, and it'll go on a lot easier. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing over here with some windows. Now these are going to be just a little bit lower in here. Okay, you may want to make those a little bit darker. What I'm calling my oil is actually our what some people call medium, which is a mixture of linseed oil and also just a little bit of thinner too. So, and in fact, if you want to just mix 50-50, that's usually a good combination to get a nice painting medium. Now we're going to bring in the barn door. It's coming over not quite to the edge of that corner in there. Okay, here my paint's still just a little bit too thick, so I'm going to thin it out a little bit more and put that in. There, now it's going on dark. So just remember, if you're having a hard time, maybe you just need to add a little bit more of your medium, which is the oil mixture. Okay, and that's about all you need to do with that. Now I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting before we move on, and now I'm going to take the real tiny little tiny script or detail brush. It's very, very tiny. In fact, this is a size 1, so it's really small. And I'm going to edge around these windows. Just put a little bit of a frame around there. Kind of sets them off a little bit more. Now see, I realize we're going to be picking up a lot of wet paint. But see how it sets those off? Okay, and then a little crisscross in here. You can actually cut that with your palette knife later on if you want to, but this is just as easy like that. Oh, here we have a little top window we need to put in. And we can just simply use this same brush, I guess. Sometimes it's easy to forget, or like I say, maybe you'll custom build your own little barn. But let's do a little dark window right up in here. There we go, which we can outline then with our blue-gray. And then we can run a line right across here, just kind of break it up a little bit, make it kind of interesting. And then we're going to still take that same color because that makes it, oh, in fact, I'm going to change colors. I'm going to go to the off-white for this next highlight around the windows. This is kind of the frame right around the windows. It kind of frames it in. It's picking up a little bit of the other blue color, but that's still all right. So we're going to border those little windows in there. It may not be as easy to see on your set, but these are little touches that do kind of finish off the barn in a nice way. Okay, that should finish our little barn there. And now I'm going to just, while I've got this smaller brush, I'm going to insert my little fences at the side of the barn, and then we'll move on to our grass. So you can still take some burnt umber, mixed with a little bit of your oil, and then I'm going to just, now this one you can make these all crickety pieces of wood just hanging down. You can put as many of these as you want, and it's really not hard, just a little stroke up and down, kind of. I think it makes it even more interesting to slope these. So we have a couple going this way, maybe a few more, you know, different directions, like so. They don't really have to be even, they don't have to be a certain size. And like I say, see, we lighten this up so that this is going to show up a little bit more on this side. I do like to kind of slant them different ways. And maybe there's a break in there. The kids used to crawl through there, and they used to sneak out, and they just left that break. Nobody ever fixed it. So see, we've got a break in there. Here's some more fence posts. Getting a little smaller as they go into the distance. Now you just simply put a little cross wood across there and a couple more over here. And then right over into the very distant little fence like that. That's all you need to do with the fence. Okay, now we're going to go on to a couple more colors that we're going to mix. We'll start with the pale yellow, and then we'll do a muted brown and a green so that we can do our grass. With the pale yellow, it's almost like our off-white, except we use a few different things. Okay, you use white. And we'll just stick this color right over here. We're going to use white, and then a touch of this cad yellow light. And you need to be careful when I go into the next color because it's really powerful with this color combination. Touch of Payne's Gray. This is very dark. Be really careful. And when I say touch, just a teensy touch. Boy, I hope that's not too much. Okay, here we'll put a little bit in there. It is a pale yellow, but it's kind of dusty. It's really not a real clean color, but you want to make sure you don't get too much or else it'll turn kind of green on you. Oh, there we go. That's a little bit green. I hope it's not too green. Looks pretty good to me. I'm going to take a little bit of this yellow ochre over here as well. Ooh, there we go. Okay, that should be kind of a pale yellow. This is for our grass. Then the next color we'll use for our grass is called a muted brown. We'll take raw sienna, white, and Payne's Gray. So some raw. And we need quite a bit of this, so I'm going to take a little bit more raw sienna, white. And I try to tell you pretty much in the order of the amount. So you actually end up using more raw sienna in this one than white. Okay, then a little Payne's Gray. Ooh. This is kind of an unusual kind of brown. I know when we mix these colors, it's really funny how sometimes these palette mixtures, they really look pretty ducky sometimes. But all together, they go together to make a really pretty painting. Okay, see how kind of mucky brown that is? We call it a muted brown. Then the next color is going to be moss green. So these three colors, the pale yellow, the muted brown, and the moss green mixture, are going to be what we use to block in the grass in this area, and then we'll pull it up with the fan brush in a minute. Okay, so let's mix up that moss green now with, oh, it looks like we need a little bit more Payne's Gray in here, which is actually quite a blue color. And I know it looks really dark on your palette, but it is actually quite blue. Okay, so we'll take some of that Payne's Gray and some raw sienna. Mix that up. This is a really kind of a mossy, I know these colors are just, they're really a funny combination as you look at these because they really don't look very attractive, but all together it really comes together to make a nice combination. Okay, that's all you need to do to create that color. So now we'll put this down and grab our Bristle Bright number 12, and I'm going to do, just like we talked about, a little block in. Now if you need to use some of your oil, you can grab some of this. I'm going to stock up a little bit more in my dipping can. Okay, pale yellow with the Bristle Bright number 12. Now I'm going to just kind of block this in. So you really don't have to pay a lot of attention to the detail on this because we come back, like I say, with our fan a little later and put that in. Okay, so a little bit of your pale yellow on this other side of the shadow. See, we've got kind of a shadow that's being cast over into the grass from this barn. So we're going to skip that and then we'll bring this pale yellow over on into this side. Just really scrubbing that in. Kind of watch out for your little fence posts. Well, I'll tell you what, let's just paint right over those. If you've made your under layout lines dark enough, maybe you can see those. Okay, so now I'm leaving a space for kind of a shadow. Just pull this over and it extends into those fence posts. A little bit more pale yellow. This really brings some light into your grass. And also, when we put the highlights, it'll even be more light and sunny. You want to kind of overshoot this a little bit. In other words, make it a little bit bigger than your finished yellow because when you start working with those dark colors, then it diminishes it. And you really don't want to lose your lights because it's important to keep a fairly sunny look to this. Okay, now just you can wipe out your brush. Don't have to really clean it out very much. And I'm going to go into the one that's called the muted brown. Back up to the canvas. Now we're going to just kind of get this little shadow in here. This feels kind of stiff, this color. As you are painting, you judge this as far as texture. You may need to dip into a little bit of the oil as you're painting. Okay, we're extending that out here. There's an area I can see we need to add a little bit more light yellow to right in here. Okay, extending over at the side of the barn just a little bit. Okay, and then we'll put quite a big patch of it down here. We do want to kind of keep the dark colors more toward the bottom on this one. You know, sometimes I clank my little easel here. Wonder what that sound is. I'm going to wipe this out and dip a little bit more of my yellow now that space we overlooked right up in here, and then we can pull the brown back into it as we paint. Okay, now just wiping, you don't really need to clean it very much. Now into the darker, the moss green color, we're going to just kind of block this in. You kind of want to keep track of where those fence posts are, but you really don't have to leave it totally blank. Really scrubbing this, nice and big strokes. Maybe a little bit of green up in there. You basically want to get all of your canvas covered except maybe a few spots where your fence posts are coming through. So after you've covered your canvas, then we're going to pick up our little fan brush and do some pulling with that. Okay, so that covers it pretty much. Now we'll take our fan brush and we're just going to do some grass work in here. You may have to add a little bit as you go. You may not even have to add any at all if you've got enough paint already on your canvas. Okay, just kind of pulling this in here. You may have to add a little bit more of the darker colors just to create that nice shadow. And change directions on this too. Kind of pull. You can pull or pull down or push up. You may need to also add a little bit of oil as you're doing this. See how we pull that through? That really starts to make that look like grass in there. Pulling again into some of these other colors. It's okay if they overlap a little bit too, because that makes it look more grassy. See how that's just getting a real grassy look in there? Just trying to keep a little bit of an area where our fence posts are. I know sometimes this is hard. If you feel like as you're painting you really you don't want to go where the fence posts are, you want to really try to keep track of them, then just leave them blank. Okay, we're kind of just pulling some of these dark colors around. Now I'm going to take some yellow and pull in even some more texture in that grass. And like I say, if it doesn't stay on there very much, you may need to dip into some of your medium to thin that color out. If you look at the palette, see, I'm getting that fairly thin so that the thinner paint will stick to the thicker paint. Kind of pull up if you need to. Sometimes these little old grasses get pretty long out there. They've been growing for a long time. Pull some of these up in here. Oops, a little bit of the yellow. Kind of overlap this over the dark too. That kind of gives it a nice grassy feel. Okay, now you can just block in some of those posts. If you want to take your sable flat number 10, and we'll just simply lay those in. You also, if you want to get creative, can use the palette knife for this. A lot of these things, they don't have to be one particular kind. We're using burnt umber on these posts. And do kind of create a little bit different angles on them. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Different angles the way they lay. Okay, a little tiny one kind of leaning over in there. Now take your small detail brush and you'll want to pull the little fence post across. Okay, this goes really quickly. Just kind of pull this right across, like so, and kind of snap it in the middle. Just let that stop over there. And then we'll pull this across here. This is kind of like the look of a barbed wire. Okay, now we'll want to do a few little daisies. Take some of your off-white mixture, and we still have this tiny little detail brush, and we're going to put a few little daisies here at the bottom. Now, I don't know if you can see this very well. Sometimes they'll show up better against the dark. So come into the dark, and as you lay these down, just kind of pull out from the outside. You see how we're laying in some of those little petals? Pulling from the outside. Some you can make whole daisies. In other words, you see the whole round kind of shape of the daisy. I'm going to put a little touch of yellow in the center. Like that. And then some you can make just side daisies. Now I'm going to go on. You can finish putting a few more of these little daisies in where you'd like to. You can put a whole bunch or just a few. Try to make them spaced out so they're not exactly polka dotted. A few maybe together in here. Just use your own liberties as you'd like just to make those look nice. Okay, you may want to, if you need to use a small chisel edge, you may want to just kind of fill in around these fence posts so that you make sure that you're covering all your white. There, how's that like? We'll highlight our fence posts, do a couple of little seedlings, and then we'll move on. Now for your fence posts, you can just take some of your yellow and just simply lighten the light side of this. I'm using the small script brush in here. Okay, and you can put a few little grasses growing in here as you'd like to pull those through. Small detail brush here again. Now some seedlings we can get by taking a real thin mixture of our off-white and just touching in with this brush called a tree brush. And this really gives it a fun, nice effect. It's almost a spattering effect. And then the last little thing that you'll want to do before we're finished is to put some birds up in the sky. After we blend a little. Oh, I just love to see these little seedlings in here. This really adds a nice finishing touch to your painting if you can use this little tree brush to get that spread effect. Okay, now I'm going to just blend softly the sky and then we'll put those birds in there. Okay, I'm taking the rabbit hair blender, softly blending this sky. Try to avoid getting into that cabin too much, or into the barn. Now we're just softening in here a little bit with those distant mountains. It kind of makes it look misty. Then the last little thing, we'll take our detail brush and quite a bit of oil into the burnt umber. And these are actually just, I don't know if you can see this on the palette, I'm just going to do little V's, like so. Kind of like that. Okay, a few little, now what you might do too, especially if your canvas is dry, I kind of balance with my little finger in here. This really creates life in the picture, I feel. Now kind of space them out differently so that they're not exactly the same distance apart. Now let's take a little bit of a look at that one. If you have some areas, I know sometimes if you're painting at home, it's easier to do the whole thing and then come back and do the fence posts so that you can cover all this little white. I know we're getting a few little spots of white in here. There we go. Seeing the finished painting gets you excited about taking the weekend off and going for a relaxing ride in the country to renew pleasant memories of days gone by. I hope painting this country scene has been enjoyable for you and encourages you to try other paint by videos, such as the golden quaking aspen, mountain in the pines, sunset seascape, and misty green forest. Thank you for spending this time with me today. This is Kendra Burton. Bye.